The city never looked quite the same after the rain. Streets glistened, shadows deepened, and the usual hum of life seemed to carry a faint undercurrent of something unsettled. Emma pulled her coat tighter, the sharp wind tugging at her scarf as she hurried along the slick pavement. The evening was quieter than usual for her neighborhood, a part of town where the glow of lampposts cast long, wavering circles of light onto the wet asphalt. But then, perched silently atop one such lamppost, a black shape caught her eye. A crow, unremarkable and yet impossibly watchful. It tilted its head, its glossy feathers gleaming like shards of midnight. Emma paused, feeling the weight of its gaze settle on her, as if the bird were carrying a message meant only for her. She shook off the unease and pressed on, thinking how absurd it was that a city crow could feel so strange these days. Still, it followed. From lamppost to fire escape, the bird's shadow seemed stitched to hers. It appeared more than once during her commute, always watching with those sharp eyes. It wasn't the first time Emma had seen crows in the city. They were nearly ubiquitous, but none had ever lingered this long, at least not in her experience. Emma's life had rarely been one to invite mystery. She worked at a local bookstore, tucked in a quiet corner between a bakery and a florist. Late nights were usually spent cataloging old volumes or closing up. The small bell above the door announcing her departure to the empty streets. But lately, the city felt different, the air heavier, as if time itself had begun folding in unexpected ways. The crow made its presence known one evening as Emma locked up, its caw piercing the stillness. She glanced up sharply. The bird was closer now, almost within reach. She froze when it suddenly took flight, swooping low before circling twice and disappearing into the night. That same night, at home, Emma found a black feather on her windowsill. It was utterly ordinary, yet when she touched it, a shiver traced down her spine. Rising from her chair, she noticed her bookshelf. Something strange about it. For a moment, a flicker of movement caught her eye, just beyond the glass pane of her living room window. Outside, barely visible in the darkened street, stood a solitary crow, as if waiting. Disturbed but unable to look away, Emma watched until the bird abruptly turned its head and then vanished into the consuming shadows. Sleep eluded her, the feather tucked in her palm as she lay awake, heart thudding with the sense that this crow was no mere bird. The question floated in her mind. Why had it singled her out? And more unnervingly, what would it want from her next? The rain began to fall just as Emma stepped out onto the dimly lit street, its cold droplets blurring the edges of the city's flickering street lamps. The evening felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself carried invisible weight. She pulled her coat tighter, feeling the familiar prickly sensation on her skin, the after effect of touching the crow's feather the night before. From the shadows near the park bench across the street, two glinting eyes caught her attention. The crow was back. It perched silently, its sleek black feathers ruffled slightly from the rain, head cocked as if studying her. Emma's heart tightened. This wasn't just coincidence anymore. The bird wasn't just following her, it was waiting. A sudden movement nearby made her flinch. On the wet pavement lay a small, shivering shape. Emma hurried forward, squinting through the gloom. It was a kitten, soaked and trembling violently, its tiny body almost translucent in the dim light. The animal's wide eyes locked onto hers, a silent plea etched in its gaze. Instinct took over. She bent down, carefully scooping the fragile creature into her arms. The kitten's purr was barely audible, but its trust was immediate. Emma's fingers stroked its barely furred head, and a shiver ran down her spine, not wholly from the cold. Something about the kitten felt otherworldly, too fragile, too strange for the urban night. As she stood, the crow cawed sharply, fluttering from its perch to land atop the nearby lamp-post. Its beady eyes never left her, as if urging her to look closer. Emma glanced down at the kitten, then back toward the watching bird. An uneasy connection sparking between them. Pulling her coat tighter around the kitten, Emma whispered to herself, "What are you trying to show me?" The crow's presence seemed to pulse in the dark, like a silent challenge. As she headed toward her apartment, the kitten curled against her chest, warmth spreading despite the creeping chill in the air. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a question took root. Why had the crow brought this lost creature to her doorstep? And what would happen if she dared to care for it? The rain intensified, masking the soft thud of wings behind her. Emma didn't turn around, but the feeling of unseen eyes following her grew heavier with every step. The rain had eased into a light drizzle, but the chill clung stubbornly to Emma's skin as she hurried down the slick sidewalk, the fragile kitten cradled protectively against her chest. Above them, the persistent crow perched silently on a street lamp, its glossy black eyes never straying far from her. It was as if the bird's very presence formed a barrier between her and the ordinary world, a dark sentinel guiding her deeper into something unseen. At home, Emma set the kitten down carefully on a makeshift bed of soft blankets in the corner of her living room. She could feel the creature's tiny heart pounding beneath its damp fur, a rapid, irregular rhythm that seemed oddly deliberate rather than frightened. The kitten's eyes, unusually large and shimmering in the dim light, held a strange depth, an intelligence far beyond a normal feline's. It watched her intently, blinking slowly like it was studying her just as much as she was trying to read it. Emma's gaze flicked toward the window, where the silhouette of the crow was still etched against the night sky, its head tilted almost expectant. The primal unease that had lingered since the feather touched her skin pulsed stronger now. "Why did you lead me to this one?" she whispered, glancing down at the fragile creature. The kitten let out a tiny, sharp mewl, but unlike an ordinary sound of distress, it carried an eerie undertone, as if it was communicating the urgency of something unspoken. She stepped back and noticed the kitten's movements were peculiar, not weak or desperate, but cautious, deliberate, like it was adapting to its new environment with a knowing ease. It stretched a delicate paw, and its claws extended briefly, gripping the blanket before retracting with unnerving precision. It was as if it wasn't just surviving, but observing, waiting for a moment to reveal what it truly was. Emma's heart pounded faster, caught between a fear she couldn't name and a strange bond that seemed to tether her fate to this enigmatic creature. The crow's watchful eyes suddenly felt heavier, more penetrating, like it was challenging her silently. "Careful what you protect. More is watching than you realize." Outside, the night deepened, the shadows growing longer, and a new presence seemed to seep into the edges of her world, something neither crow nor kitten could dispel. Emma's phone buzzed on the table, an unknown number flashing across the screen. She hesitated, feeling the weight of that silent watcher pressing in closer, waiting for her to answer. As she reached for the phone, a sudden draft brushed the kitten's fur, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural luster, unblinking, unreadable. What had she really brought home? And who was watching her from beyond the rain? The first drop of rain tapped lightly against the window, a subtle murmur in the quiet room where Emma sat still, her eyes fixed on the kitten curled tightly in her lap. Its faint purring was almost hypnotic, yet beneath the comforting rhythm, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the small creature was watching her just as intently as she watched it. In the dim light, the kitten's eyes glowed, a soft, eerie amber, and every now and then, the faintest flicker of something unworldly seemed to pulse behind that gaze. Outside, the city street was washed in grays under a sky swollen with clouds, the wind carrying the scent of damp earth and old leaves. Perched on the wrought iron railing just beyond the window, the crow watched her, unmoving but alert, its glossy feathers absorbing the light in sharp contrast to the muted world around it. It cawed softly, a sound that was more warning than song. Emma's fingers trembled slightly as she stroked the kitten's back. She had spent the night tossing between doubt and awe. How could any normal creature have such awareness, such purpose? And why had it chosen her, of all people? The strange phone call from the unknown number lingered in her mind, the distorted voice on the other end, the hint of knowledge, a threat barely disguised. The kitten shifted suddenly, its whiskers twitching toward the window. Emma followed its gaze, and the crow flitted its head, revealing something grasped tightly in its beak, a small, weathered note. The bird dropped the paper onto the sill before flying off into the gathering dusk. Emma reached out, the kitten slipping gracefully from her lap to land softly at her feet. Tentatively, she unfolded the note. The ink was faint and the handwriting uneven. Protect the fragile, but beware the watchers in the storm. A shiver ran down her spine as the crow's caw echoed once more from just beyond sight. The kitten's eyes met hers, alive with a knowing that transcended explanation. What watchers were out there, and what storm was on the horizon, literal or not, that Emma was only now being drawn into. Outside, the rain began to fall in earnest, a relentless patter that seemed to pulse in harmony with the kitten's steady purr. The boundaries between the ordinary and the uncanny were dissolving, and Emma realized her life was no longer solely hers to navigate. But who else was watching her from the shadows beyond the rain? And would she be ready when they came? A sudden tap at the window startled Emma from her restless thoughts. She sat frozen, her eyes catching the silhouette of the familiar crow, perched just outside on the sill, rain dripping from its glossy feathers. The creature's obsidian eyes locked onto hers, unblinking, as if it bore a message far weightier than the weathered note it had delivered days before. The storm beyond had grown fiercer, clashing thunder rumbling like distant warnings. Emma hesitated, then slowly reached out. The crow tilted its head, as though weighing her intentions, before dropping a small object into her outstretched hand and flying off into the tempest. Her fingers curled protectively around the item, a delicate black feather inscribed with strange, faintly glowing symbols, pulsing with an eerie energy. She turned back inside, the kitten weaving silently between her legs, its tail flicking with urgent purpose. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. Emma's heart pounded. This feather was unlike anything she had ever encountered, and she sensed it linked to the watchers who shadowed her steps. As the rain streaked the windowpane, Emma's thoughts spiraled. The distorted voice from the call, the cryptic warnings, the crow's relentless vigilance. It was all converging toward something she couldn't yet comprehend. The kitten leapt onto the table, staring now at the feather with an intensity that sent shivers down Emma's spine, as if it recognized a secret code etched in the very material. Suddenly, the power flickered. The room plunged into darkness for a heartbeat before the lights returned. Too quickly, too perfectly. Emma's breath caught as the kitten hissed softly, fur bristling, eyes wide in the dim glow. Outside, a shadow darker than the storm moved with unnatural grace through the soaked streets, eyes reflecting a cold menace that seemed fixed squarely on Emma's apartment window. She clutched the feather tighter and whispered, "What are you trying to tell me?" But the answer was swallowed by the wind, and the crow's distant caw, haunting and persistent, calling her toward a truth she wasn't ready to face. What had she really invited into her life, and how deep did the watcher's gaze reach? Emma sat on the worn windowsill, the faint city lights flickering below like distant stars. The black feather lay on her palm, its symbols pulsing faintly, throbbing in sync with her heartbeat. Outside, the crow's raucous caw sliced through the evening chill, a sudden sharp call that made her jump. The bird had perched on the fire escape just beyond the glass, its glossy eyes fixed on her like an ancient sentinel. For days, Emma had been caught between reality and something that felt just beyond human understanding. The watchers lurking in shadows. The whispered voices over the phone, all of it pressing in on her like a tightening noose. And now, the feather, this overt symbol of a world she never wanted to touch. Yet, inexplicably, she had held on to it, not out of bravery, but curiosity matched with dread. Her kitten, Luna, absently pawed at her sleeve, and then suddenly arched her back, fur bristling and eyes wide. Luna's reaction was immediate and visceral, an instinct Emma couldn't ignore. The little feline's gaze locked on the crow outside, who had begun to shift uneasily, wings flicking nervously. Luna's low, unfamiliar growl vibrated in her tiny throat. Emma swallowed hard. The crow, despite its ordinary black feathers and mundane silhouette among the city's skyline, seemed uncanny, almost alive with intent. It wasn't just a bird. It was a harbinger or a guardian, or maybe both. As the night deepened, the crow took flight, circling Emma's window 3 times before vanishing into the gloom. The feather's symbols flared vividly, casting shadows that danced across her walls in strange, twisting shapes. She wasn't sure if it was an invitation or a warning, but the feeling inside her was undeniable. Something had been awakened, and it was watching, learning, waiting. Then, the whispering began. Not from the phone this time, but inside her own mind. Soft syllables curling around her thoughts, secrets unraveling in the darkness. Emma closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath, but the whispering grew louder, unrelenting. "Who are you?" she whispered aloud, voice breaking. No reply came, only the distant caw of a crow echoing through the night. And somewhere, deep inside the city's shadows, Emma felt a presence stir, unseen but not silent, patient yet inexorably drawing near. The line between watcher and watched was blurring, and Emma knew, without fully understanding how, that the crow would be the key. But to what end? The answer hovered just beyond her grasp, as elusive as a shadow on a fevered dream. Was this the beginning of her salvation, or her surrender? The crow returned that evening, settling on the rusted fire escape just outside Emma's bedroom window. Its glossy black feathers absorbed the fading light, rendering it almost unreal, an obsidian silhouette against the bruised purple sky. Luna's ears twitched in alarm, her green eyes darting anxiously between the window pane and the shadows gathering near the door. Emma sat frozen on her bed, the strange feather still clutched in her trembling hand, feeling the weight of unseen attentions pressing in from every corner. She had tried to shake off the creeping dread, telling herself it was just her imagination, that the crow was no more than a bird drawn to the dwindling warmth of the city at dusk. But Luna's frantic growls and the way the feathers' glowing symbols pulsed with greater intensity told a different story. Earlier that day, Emma had noticed subtle changes in the apartment. Small objects shifting positions when she wasn't looking, whispered syllables forming just at the edge of hearing. She remembered her neighbor's offhand comment from days before. "You sure you're all right? Sometimes the city feels alive in ways we don't expect." Now, the meaning of those words gnawed at her. As night deepened, the air grew thick with anticipation. The crow, this mundane yet impossible creature, seemed less like an omen and more like a sentinel. It watched, always watching, perched silently, as if guarding a threshold Emma hadn't yet dared to cross. The glowing feather suddenly slipped from her palm and fluttered to the floor as a cold wind swept through the cracked window, carrying with it an echo. A faint, sorrowful caw that resonated deep within her chest. Emma stood and carefully approached the fire escape, her breath visible in the chill. The crow tilted its head, eyes flickering with an eerie intelligence, as if weighing some silent exchange between them. Luna hissed softly but did not flee. Emma reached out instinctively. The bird lowered its head, almost inviting her touch. When her fingers brushed its cold feathers, a surge of images flared behind her eyelids. Streets cloaked in shadow, faces half hidden beneath hoods, and in every scene, the same caw echoed, warning or beckoning. Something was awakening, a presence older and more patient than the city itself. The question pulsing through Emma's mind was no longer if the crow would intervene in her fate, but whether she could choose to accept what it offered, or if the choice had already been made. As she stepped back, a sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow detaching itself from the streetlight below, lingering just at the edge of clarity. The crow took flight with a single, powerful wing beat, fading into the darkness while the figure below began to approach. Emma's heart hammered as the whisper of wings and footsteps intertwined, blurring the line between protector and predator. What truth would meet her next? One revealed by feathered messenger or shadowed visitor, remained shrouded in silence. Emma's breath hitched as the crow circled once more above the dimly lit city street, its sharp caw slicing through the mist like a knife. The bird lowered on a nearby lamppost, eyes glowing faintly, as if reflecting some secret knowledge only it possessed. Tonight felt heavier, charged with an ominous expectancy she couldn't shake. Since the shadowy figure had stepped from the darkness hours before, Emma's senses seemed heightened to a painful degree. Every whisper of wind against brick, every flicker of neon sign felt like a coded message. Alone in her cramped apartment, she replayed the moment she'd touched the crow's feather. That cold grasp, the rush of visions, faces she didn't recognize, streets that twisted impossibly. Conversations spoken in a language just beyond comprehension, and beneath it all, the ceaseless, mournful cawing. It wasn't merely a sound now, it was a summons. Earlier that day, driven by a restless need to find some grounding, Emma had wandered to the neighborhood park, the usual refuge where the city's hum softened to a distant whisper. The crow, ever watchful, perched silently on a weathered bench as if waiting for her. She sat beside it, heart pounding, eyes locked with the bird's ink-black stare, and suddenly felt an overwhelming surge of sorrow, as if she were catching fragments of some unseen world bleeding through. Her phone vibrated sharply in her pocket, An unknown number. Hesitating, she answered. Emma. The voice was low, distorted, almost otherworldly. Your eyes are open now. The city is watching back. Before she could reply, the line went dead. She stared at the screen, dread pooling in her stomach. Back in her apartment, the crow had vanished from the street lamp, but on her windowsill lay a small, dark feather, its edges glowing faintly as if imbued with moonlight. Reaching out, she touched it, and for a split second, the room darkened, reality bending. She glimpsed a narrow alley bathed in shadows, and standing there, a figure cloaked in tattered, swirling black feathers, watching her silently. Her phone buzzed again, a message this time, a single word. Follow. Emma's fingers trembled. The weight of choice pressed down harder than ever. To uncover the truth meant stepping into a labyrinth with no guarantee of escape. To ignore the call could mean forever losing something she hadn't yet fully understood. Outside, the city lights flickered, and through the thinning mist, a familiar silhouette appeared, barely visible but unmistakable. The crow, poised once more at the edge of the night, an unblinking sentinel that seemed to invite her into the darkest corners of the world she thought she knew. Could she answer the call, or was the crow merely a witness to a fate already sealed? The night held its breath. Emma's breath caught as she stepped into the city's small, crowded veterinary clinic, an unlikely sanctuary amid the looming gray towers. Her hands trembled, clutching a small, battered black carrier with the faintest weight of something alive inside. Outside, the persistent crow perched on the traffic light, its sharp eyes tracking her every move, an unblinking sentinel seemingly waiting for what came next. Inside, the clinic buzzed softly with distant conversations and the hum of fluorescent lights. But time itself felt altered. Emma's heartbeat pulsed heavily, mixing dread and a strange anticipation as she sat down on a plastic chair. She wasn't sure what she expected. Answers, some tangible proof that her mind wasn't unraveling. Or maybe just closure. The carrier before her stirred slightly. The creature within was restless. A nurse called her name quietly, breaking through the thick tension. Emma followed into the narrow hallway, walls closing in with antiseptic sterility. A soft light illuminated the examination room where a man stepped in moments later. Dr. Harper, a vet with silver hair and eyes too tired to smile. His presence was reassuring, yet Emma sensed an undertone of something else, a weight of knowledge barely concealed. So, what do we have here? His voice was gentle but carried the authority of experience. Emma set the carrier down and carefully lifted out the creature. It was no puppy, but something far more curious. A small, furry shape with eyes too wide, too intelligent. Before her now was a delicate, almost ethereal black kitten, its fur shimmering with uncanny iridescence in the harsh light. Yet, the kitten's gaze wasn't innocent. It held a depth of ancient sorrow, as if it had witnessed worlds Emma couldn't comprehend. Dr. Harper's eyes narrowed the moment he touched the creature's fur, his brow furrowing in concentration. Where did you find it? On my way home, near the park, beside the old fountain. I thought it was a homeless animal, Emma answered, voice barely steady. The vet's hands moved methodically, checking the kitten's teeth, ears, paws. As he worked, his expression shifted. Curiosity deepened into confusion, then darkened into something resembling fear. The room seemed to grow colder, shadows lengthening near the edges of the fluorescent glow. Emma's throat tightened. Is something wrong? Harper didn't answer immediately. His trembling fingers gripped the edge of the table, and his gaze locked onto the creature's eyes with a dawning horror. "This isn't an ordinary animal," he whispered. It's something else. Something not meant to walk in our world." The kitten made a soft, almost melodic sound, unlike any purr, a quiet song that echoed faintly, reverberating in Emma's chest. At once the air thickened, the lights flickered. The crow outside cawed sharply, as if signaling some unseen truth. Emma's skin prickled with a mix of awe and dread. What do you mean?" she stammered. "Is it sick? Dangerous?" Dr. Harper shook his head slowly, eyes wide. "I've seen many strange things in my years, but this is a creature touched by something old, something beyond our realm. And where there's one, there might be more. You need to be careful, Emma." Her heart thundered. The crow's black silhouette appeared then outside the window, still watching, still waiting. As Emma locked eyes with the creature in her hands, a question burned in her mind. Was this mysterious kitten a key or a curse that would unravel the thin veil between the city and the shadows beyond? And what fate did the crow intend for her to uncover next? The crow's ragged caw split through the stagnant air as Emma stepped cautiously into the dim vet clinic, clutching the trembling black kitten close to her chest. The bird lingered just beyond the window, perched like a silent sentinel, its coal-black eyes gleaming with an unnerving intelligence that made Emma's skin prickle. Dr. Harper looked up, his face pale and lined with exhaustion. The faint glow from the flickering overhead lights cast long shadows across his furrowed brow. "You brought it back," he said quietly, as if stating something impossible, the words hanging between them like a fragile thread. Emma nodded, voice barely audible. "I had to. I can't just leave it out there." The kitten's mournful gaze met hers, and for a brief moment the room seemed to tighten around them, suffused with a silence so heavy it pressed on Emma's chest. Then the kitten emitted that haunting melody again, a series of low, warbling notes that wove through the air like a forgotten lament. Dr. Harper swallowed hard, eyes flicking to the corner of the room where the crow had silently slipped inside, landing on the windowsill. Its ebony feathers shimmered oddly under the flickering light, each movement deliberate, as if counting seconds on a hidden clock. "What you're dealing with," Dr. Harper began slowly, voice strained, "isn't just some strange animal. It's a sentinel, something that bridges worlds." Emma's fingers tightened involuntarily around the kitten's thin frame. "A bridge? Between what?" He hesitated. "Between our reality and the shadow realm. That kitten, whatever it truly is, carries a weight, a tether that shouldn't be here, and that crow," he nodded toward the bird now tilted slightly, watching them with an almost mocking gaze. "It's bound to it. It's the watcher, a harbinger tied to the flow between realms." The kitten's melody swelled briefly, the lights flickered again, and a cold draft swept through the room despite the sealed windows. "Why does it sing like that? What does it want?" Dr. Harper's gaze darkened. "The song is a warning and a call, channeled from something ancient and restless. Each note tears at the veil, weakening the boundary. You've unleashed something, Emma." Before she could respond, the crow tapped sharply on the glass, a hollow sound that echoed deep inside her mind. The kitten's eyes seemed to shimmer with a spectral light, and for a fleeting second, Emma glimpsed a shadowed landscape, endless twilight skies, twisting trees, and flickering forms that bore no resemblance to anything earthly. The crow cawed once more, a sound both mournful and urgent. Then, suddenly, the kitten stiffened within her grasp, claws extending briefly, only to relax again as if seized by a wave of internal conflict. Dr. Harper's voice was barely a whisper now. Something's coming through. And soon. Emma's heart thundered as the clinic's lights died altogether, plunging them into abyssal darkness. Only the faint, eerie glow from the kitten's eyes and the intense gaze of the crow remained as anchor points in the void. Outside, the city lay oblivious, but Emma knew the veil was thinning. And the Watcher had chosen her for a purpose she was only beginning to understand. What price would it demand? And how far would she be pushed before the other side claimed its due? Emma's hands trembled as she cradled the shimmering kitten, its tiny frame trembling like a leaf caught in a breeze no one else could feel. Outside, the city's usual symphony of honking cars and distant chatter seemed muted, swallowed by the eerie quiet that had settled like a fog. Perched silently on the cracked windowsill was the familiar black crow, its glossy feathers brushing the glass, its coal black eyes fixed unwaveringly on Emma, as if it knew the storm gathering within her soul. The kitten's melody had grown louder again, a haunting lullaby that echoed not just through the clinic walls, but through her mind, threading into memories she didn't remember living and places she shouldn't be able to see. The tether it bore pulsed faintly under Emma's fingers, a thread that anchored two worlds to one fragile point. And yet, something else churned beneath the surface, a predator lurking in shadows she couldn't yet glimpse. Dr. Harper appeared at the door, her face drawn tight with exhaustion and something darker. Fear. "Emma," she said quietly, "there's more. The kitten isn't just a sentinel. It's something of a battleground. The tether connects it to the shadow realm, but that realm is bleeding through. Unsettled forces are converging on this point, and the Watcher," she nodded toward the crow, "is both guardian and gatekeeper." Emma's breath hitched. "But if the veil is breaking," she whispered, "then what comes through?" The crow ruffled its feathers, or perhaps shuddered against the strange energy saturating the room, and a low caw broke the silence, a sound resonant, almost like a warning. Suddenly, the kitten's melody twisted into a discordant, desperate cry. Emma's vision blurred and shifted. She glimpsed flickers of the shadow realm, twisted trees with gouged bark that seeped ink-black sap, faint outlines of beings both grotesque and sorrowful. They moved closer, drawn by the tether's light. "Emma, you have to make a choice." Harper's voice trembled. "Keep holding the kitten, and the veil will continue to tear. Letting go, though, you risk losing the fragile balance completely." The crow's gaze locked onto Emma's, ancient and unreadable. It hopped closer, its beak scraping softly against the windowsill. Emma's pulse thundered. The kitten's eyes, now glowing fiercely, met hers with a silent plea. Somewhere deep within her, she felt a rift open, a choice that would crush or save them all. But what would the crow do when that choice was made? And would it be watching, or something else entirely? A sudden, sharp knock echoed at the clinic door, jolting Emma back to the waking world. The crow tilted its head, as if warning her. Fate was knocking, and this time, it would not wait. The crow perched silently at the clinic's frosted window, its dark eyes reflecting the uneasy flicker of the fluorescent lights inside. Outside, the city thrummed with indifferent life, a soundtrack of distant sirens, footsteps, and the hum of forgotten conversations. But inside this small, cluttered room, time slowed, weighed down by the tenuous balance between worlds. Emma tightened her grip around the tethered kitten cradled in her arms. The creature, its fur a patchwork of shadow and silken silver, blinked up at her with eyes that seemed too deep and ancient, glowing faintly as if harboring secrets no human was meant to know. The thin thread connecting Kitten and reality trembled, simmering with an unstable magic that pulsed like a living heartbeat. Dr. Harper paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The whispered warnings he'd shared earlier now echoed louder in Emma's mind. Hold on, and the rift widens. Let go, and all the fragile equilibrium could shatter irreparably. The room grew colder, the ambient light fracturing as if the space itself was being stretched too thin. Then came another knock, this time sharper, more urgent. Emma's breath caught. She exchanged a glance with Harper, whose face had drained of color. On instinct, she eased the kitten closer, her fingers tightening protectively around the thread. The door creaked open to reveal a man in a worn leather jacket, his eyes flickering with unease as he stepped inside. Beside him, a small wooden box was clasped tightly in his hands. Without introduction, he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "You don't know what you're holding. Not yet." Emma's heart hammered. She recognized the weight of his words, not as a threat, but as a tremor of awareness from someone who had glimpsed the abyss before. The crow outside cawed sharply, ruffling its feathers as if responding to this new presence. "What do you mean?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man set the box down gently and lifted its lid, revealing an assortment of strange artifacts: a cracked compass, a cluster of faded feathers, and a folded parchment etched with cryptic symbols. There's a deeper darkness tied to that creature, a shadow within the shadow you're already grappling with. Harper's eyes narrowed. "And you're saying what exactly? That this kitten is part of something bigger?" The man nodded grimly. "This isn't just a battleground, it's a beacon, the kind that calls others like it. And once they arrive, the veil won't just tear, it'll rip wide open." Emma looked down at the kitten, which stirred restlessly, emitting a faint, otherworldly glow. The crow shifted on the windowsill, its gaze burning not with judgment, but as if waiting for the moment the scales would tip. Outside, beneath the indifferent city skies, shadows lengthened, and the boundary between worlds thinned dangerously. Who or what was coming, drawn by the tether's fragile pulse? And would the crow intervene to guard the fragile threshold, or herald the chaos about to unravel? The room seemed to hold its breath, poised on the knife's edge between salvation and surrender. The crow's harsh caw shattered the stillness of the room, drawing Emma's gaze to the rain-speckled window pane where it perched as if waiting for an answer. Outside, the city's ordinary gray blurred into shadows and streetlights. But inside, the heavy air grew heavier, laden with questions they could barely voice. Emma knelt beside the kitten, which trembled faintly under the thin thread tethering it to their world, its ethereal glow pulsing like a fragile heartbeat. Harper stood close, eyes darting toward the man in the worn leather jacket who had not yet spoken again since his dire warning. The stranger's cracked compass lay open on the table, its needles spinning wildly as if caught in some unseen vortex. Faded feathers spilled from the wooden box, their edges curling like aged secrets. But it was the cryptic parchment, smeared with indecipherable symbols, that seemed to pulse with a dark intent, whispering of doors better left unopened. "Who are you?" Harper finally demanded, voice trembling yet fierce. "And why does this kitten's presence pull shadows toward us?" The man's steely gaze softened, but a shadow crossed his face. "I am only a sentinel, like that crow outside. It watches. It waits. This kitten, it's a sigil, a tether." But not just to the veil. It's tied to something older, something feral hidden beneath the pulse of this city. I wasn't sure it would come to this. I hoped the beacon would stay dormant. Emma's mind raced. The man's words cast the kitten in a new light. Not just a fragile creature, but a lure for forces lurking beyond human perception. Older, feral, she echoed, but the man shook his head. There's a deep wildness in this shadow, like the echo of a predator displaced, the kind you don't expect in urban streets, but it hunts nonetheless. This kitten may be small, but it carries the howl of something vast, cut loose from its origin. A sudden tap, rapid and precise, startled them all. The man's eyes flicked to the window just as the crow took flight, wings slicing through the mist like a blade. It circled once, then vanished into the dark alley beyond. Animals have always been messengers, the man said, voice heavy with warning. This crow isn't just a watcher, it's a harbinger, sometimes protector, sometimes herald of what arrives next. Harper swallowed hard, glancing back at the kitten glowing uneasily on the floor. If something wild is coming, what will it mean for us? For the city? Before the man could answer, a sudden chill swept through the room, extinguishing the flickering candle. In the dark, the kitten's glow flared wild, sharp, frantic, then dimmed to a single plaintive glimmer. From the silence emerged a soft, almost human whisper, just beyond the edges of hearing. And somewhere outside, just beyond the veil of rain and shadow, the distant cry of an unknown creature answered. The man's face paled, eyes fixed on the doorway. They're waking. Emma shivered as an eerie feeling settled deep in her bones. The tether was thinning, and the boundary between worlds was fraying fast. What was about to step through, and could they hold the door closed long enough to survive? The crow's distant call echoed again. This time it wasn't a warning, it was an invitation. The sharp caw of a crow sliced through the settling dusk, an urgent rhythm that echoed down the narrow alley beside Emma's apartment. She froze mid-step, the unsettling whisper from earlier still resonating in her mind like a half-remembered nightmare. The crow, black-feathered and ordinary-looking to any passerby, perched low on the rusty fire escape railing above, its coal eyes glinting with something almost human, an impossible knowing. As Emma glanced up, the bird tilted its head, watching her, waiting. Inside, the kitten, no longer just a softly glowing pet, pulsed faintly like a heartbeat, its light flickering with a strange energy. The man's warning echoed. They're waking. And right now, the veil between their world and something far older, far wilder, thinned with every breath Emma took. Backstory gnawed at her thoughts. This wasn't just an abandoned animal, a helpless stray glowing like a neon lantern in the dark. This kitten was a seed of wilderness, of something raw and feral buried beneath the city's concrete jaws. It held a tether to ancient forces, the deep wildness the man had spoken of, a force humanity wasn't meant to touch. Emma had felt it edge dangerously close, an invisible tremor beneath the surface of her calm life. The crow cawed again, more insistently this time. Emma's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated but answered. The thin, static-laced whisper on the line was almost too faint to catch. They come when the crow calls. The voice faded abruptly. The line went dead. Her heart jumped. Was it a threat, a warning, or something else? Suddenly, the kitten flared with bright white light, blinding for a moment, and the candle on her windowsill sputtered, its flame dancing madly despite the still air. A distant shriek cut through the city noise, neither quite human nor animal, a haunting sound that made Emma shiver. She felt, more than saw, a ripple like a pale shadow sliding just beyond the threshold of vision. Tension gripped her chest. How many of these shadows waited beneath their feet? How many eyes reflected in the dark, watching, yearning to cross over? The crow lifted off, wings beating slow and heavy in the twilight, and Emma found herself compelled to follow it, drawn down the alley as if by unseen threads. Each step thrummed with the weight of old magic, the city's pulse syncing with hers. The kitten's light dimmed, then steadied, an anchor tethered to the unfolding unknown. At the alley's mouth, a figure flickered in the half-light, barely more than a silhouette. The crow landed nearby, its head cocked in invitation, while from the shadows came that whisper again, this time clearer and closer. "It begins." Emma swallowed hard. Was this the herald of a new dawn, or the harbinger of an ancient reckoning? The glow in the kitten's eyes deepened to a fierce amber as the night tightened its grasp. Behind her, the city thrummed, indifferent and oblivious. But Emma knew some door had cracked open tonight. The question was whether it could be closed before what waited on the other side stepped through. She tightened her grip on the kitten, feeling its warmth pulse against her palm, and somewhere beyond the walls, the caw of crows multiplied, urgent and countless. What had the crow truly summoned? And could Emma stop what was coming before the wildness consumed everything? The night was watching, and it was hungry. The city felt too quiet. Emma stood at the edge of the alleyway, the faint glow from the kitten's eyes barely pushing back the growing shadows. The crow perched silently on a bent street lamp overhead, its jet-black feathers glossy under the pale moonlight, its beady eyes fixed intently on her, as if waiting for something, a signal only it understood. She squeezed the kitten closer, feeling the warmth radiate through its small frame. The creature's amber gaze flickered with urgency, yet it remained oddly calm, like a beacon against the encroaching darkness. Emma's breath hitched. The whispers beneath the city, the ripples of shadow that sometimes flashed at the corner of her vision, they were all real. And the crow was the key. Her mind churned. How had this ordinary city bird become the harbinger of forces she barely comprehended? The cryptic phone call echoed again in her ears. They come when the crow calls. What if the call wasn't a warning, but a summons? A sharp caw shattered the stillness, and the crow launched itself into the air, gliding like a phantom into the deepening night. Instinctively, Emma followed, the kitten's light pulsing in rhythm with the bird's shadowy dance above. As they moved, the city's familiar contours distorted. The fire hydrant by the corner gleamed like molten silver. The pavement shadows writhed like living ink. She remembered the shadowy figure at the alley's mouth whispering, "It begins." What had begun? A ritual spanning centuries. A breach between worlds. Emma's heart hammered in her chest as she chased deeper into the maze of streets. Suddenly the crow halted on a wrought-iron fence surrounding a forgotten garden, overgrown and choked with twisting vines. Behind the barred gate, the air shimmered. A silent portal whispered to be crossed. The kitten's glow flared brightly, and Emma felt the hum of ancient energy coursing through her fingertips. A voice, a low, gravelly murmur, brushed past her ear. She spun around, but the alley was empty save for the crows gathering overhead, dark shapes crowding the silver moon. "They're watching," a thought formed. Or was it a warning? A presence pressed close, cold and expectant. Emma's grip tightened on the kitten. Could this small creature truly anchor the fragile boundary between her world and whatever lay beyond? And what price would she pay for answering the crow's call? The wind shifted, carrying a faint, chilling caw echoing from deep beneath the city's bones, promising that the true reckoning was only just beginning. As the garden gate creaked open on its own, a creeping shadow spilled out, and the kitten's eyes blazed. But for whom was it signaling? Emma stepped forward, heart uncertain but resolute. The crow watched and waited. When Emma woke that morning, a single crow was perched silently on her windowsill, its jet-black eyes locking onto hers with unsettling intensity. It tilted its head as if expecting something, then took off into the gray dawn, vanishing between the high city rooftops. The crow had become an ever-present specter, threading itself through her waking hours and restless nights. The kitten, now named Lumen for the dim glow pulsing beneath its fur, curled tightly in her jacket pocket. It had grown quieter, its eyes reflecting the creeping shadows that seemed to follow her. The phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. Beware the watchers in the daylight. Shadows walk where crows flock. Emma's mind reeled. Though her recent days had felt like walking on the edge of a nightmare, now the threat seemed to creep into the mundane, into the light. She left her apartment, feeling the weight of unseen eyes tracking her every step. Crow cries echoed, a chilling chorus threading through the usual city sounds. The bustling streets offered no comfort. Passers-by shifted uneasily as Emma passed, some stealing furtive glances, others hurrying past with lowered heads, as if shielding themselves from something only she perceived. On a nearby bench, a child pointed, whispering, "Look, that crow, it's watching her again." Emma's pulse quickened. Could others see this? Had the crow's presence begun to bleed into the world around her? Lumen stirred, the kitten's soft whimper barely audible. Yet Emma felt it, an urgent plea. As if Lumen sensed the tightening noose of intangible threats inching closer. In the park, Emma caught sight of a man across the path. He was ordinary enough, yet the way a crow nestled closely on his shoulder, unnervingly like an old companion, set Emma's teeth on edge. Their eyes met briefly, and the man gave a slow nod, cryptic and knowing. Suddenly, the city noises dimmed. The world seemed to hold its breath. The crow from Emma's window soared overhead, circling once, then diving toward the man, who whispered, "They watch from the corners you dare not glance." Emma's throat tightened. This was no longer a matter of choice. The invisible watchers, drawn by the crow's call, were closing in. But who were they? And why had Emma become the pivot on which their gaze rested? She clutched Lumen tighter, feeling the kitten's warmth pulse in time with her racing heart, convinced that the kitten's glow was a fragile shield, and perhaps the only hope. As the man vanished into the crowd, the crow's cry pierced the air again, sharp and accusing, as if demanding an answer Emma did not yet have. And in that question hung a cold truth. What price would she pay when the watchers finally stepped out of the shadowed corners to claim what the crow had summoned? The city's shadows lengthened, swallowing the edges of the day, leaving Emma standing alone with the crow's haunting call ringing in her ears. The crow's sharp caw sliced through the humid evening air, dragging Emma's attention to the shadowed alley where it perched patiently on a flickering street lamp. Its coal-black eyes glinted with a strange intelligence, unblinking, as if holding secrets meant only for her. Around them, the city pulsed with indifference, except for the few glances that brushed their way, uneasy and searching, as if others could feel the weight of something unseen pressing close. Emma clutched Lumen tighter. The kitten's faint, warm glow pulsed beneath her jacket like a heartbeat, fragile but persistent, a slender shield against the encroaching darkness. She had no answers yet, only a growing certainty that this ordinary crow was no mere bird. It was a sentinel, a messenger, or perhaps a sentinel's trap. Days had passed since Emma's unsettling conversation with the crowman, the stranger who spoke too knowingly about watchers and whispers. Her life was no longer her own. The watchers, those invisible eyes, had multiplied, and now others seemed to glimpse flickers of black wings out of the corner of their eyes, hear distant caws echoing just beyond their hearing. At the coffee shop, the barista had paused mid-pour, startled by the sudden raucous call of a crow from the street. "You're the one they say has that glowing kitten, right?" she asked quietly, eyes flicking to the window where a figure loomed in the dusk. "I don't believe in ghosts or curses, but that bird, it's like it's watching you for a reason." Emma had no reply. Back home, the city's chatter buzzed with rumors. A mysterious creature, a strange glowing pet linked to a black crow, had become something more than gossip. It was a symbol dividing the neighborhood. Some whispered that the crow was a harbinger of doom, others, a guardian spirit. The kitten's glow had become a beacon in stories. Messages on online forums, late-night calls from strangers asking if Emma was all right. But the watchers didn't care about public opinion. They prowled closer. Last night, as Emma lay sleepless in bed, a new sound had entered the fold, a faint scratching, like talons brushing concrete, circling her apartment window. The crow hadn't fled. Instead, it had creaked the shutters gently with its beak, and Lumen had hissed softly, glow pulsing faster, as if sensing the nearness of something sinister. This morning, Emma found a single feather, sleek and shimmering with an unnatural iridescence, tucked beneath her door. It felt almost alive, vibrating faintly under her fingers, the crow's signature. And then, as she stepped onto the street, she noticed the people moving differently. Eyes averted, hurried steps, whispered warnings. The watchers weren't just closing in on her. They were drawing the city into the mystery, into the waiting. Emma's breath caught as a familiar caw split the morning silence. The crow circled above, then dove low, dropping a small, folded note in front of her feet. She unfolded it carefully. The ink was smeared but legible. "They come for more than you think. The price is rising." Her heart roared in her chest, and Lumen's glow flared bright, trembling beneath her coat. Who sent the note? And how many watchers were moving unseen through the city, waiting for the moment Emma could no longer hide? As shadows lengthened behind the ordinary black wings, Emma realized that whatever fate the crow heralded was about to unfold. But was she the pawn or the key? The wind stirred, carrying a caw from the depths of the urban labyrinth, and somewhere in the distance, the watchers whispered a name. Emma was not alone, and the crow was only the beginning. The crow perched silently on the weathered street lamp, its glossy black feathers absorbing the pale moonlight like midnight ink. Below, Emma's neighborhood was a mosaic of shadows and flickering porch lights, a place that now felt less like home and more like a stage set for some unseen, ominous drama. Emma stood at her front door, the chill of the night seeping through her thin cardigan. Her fingers nervously traced the iridescent feather that the crow had left earlier, an unspoken message she could still not decode. The air around her hummed with an uneasy energy, as if the neighborhood itself held its breath, watching, waiting. Since the note slipped under her door, "They come for more than you think. The price is rising." The community tension had crescendoed into something tangible and suffocating. Conversations in hushed voices behind curtains, furtive glances whenever she passed, and the persistent feeling of invisible eyes tracking her every move. Neighbors she once exchanged smiles with now avoided her path, their whispers like static just out of hearing range. Some regarded her as a cursed figure tied to the glowing kitten, Lumen, and the ever-present crow, a pair of unnatural forces weaving destinies beyond mortal understanding. Others feared what the watchers might bring, blaming Emma as both the beacon and the bait. Last night, Emma had glimpsed a shadowy silhouette across from her window, silent and still, as if standing sentinel. A figure neither fully human nor entirely void, watching through the thinning veil between worlds. Her heart had hammered against her ribs, but the crow's sharp caw jolted her enough to look away, breaking the frozen moment. Her phone buzzed violently in her pocket, a string of messages from different neighbors. Some pleaded for her to leave the area for their safety. Others warned of growing dangers, cryptic and urgent. The division that once simmered now boiled over, and Emma realized the neighborhood was fracturing from within like cracked glass. As she prepared to retreat inside, the crow swooped low, shadowing her steps. It landed on the fence post beside her, cocking its head, as if weighing her resolve. Emma's breath hitched, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming sense that this creature was more than a mere witness or omen. It was a guardian, perhaps, or a keeper of unwelcome truths. The kitten, Lumen, stirred beside the doorframe, its glow faint but insistent, casting delicate waves of light that danced like fragile hope amidst gathering darkness. Emma reached out and Lumen nudged her palm with quiet urgency. The watchers were closing in faster now, their motives obscured but their hunger palpable. Emma felt the gravity of the crow's presence tighten around her, a binding that suggested a role far beyond mere survival. The price they whispered about was rising, but what currency would they collect? Her trust, her memories, or something more intrinsically tied to the flickering light within Lumen? A sudden rustle interrupted her thoughts. From the alleyway, eyes gleamed, dozens of them, the silent watchers gathering, edged by the glint of something unnatural. The crow took flight, rising above the street with a raucous cry that echoed like a warning. Emma's gaze followed it, heart pounding. The cage of the everyday world was breaking open, revealing a void she was compelled to enter. Was the crow leading her into the darkness, or away from it? The night held its breath, and so did she. The air in Emma's cramped apartment felt more suffocating than ever, the thin walls no defense against the howling void creeping ever closer. Outside the window, the city's hum was punctuated by the sharp, raucous caws of the crow perched on the fire escape, a single dark silhouette against the dying light. It had become both a watcher and a warning, its unblinking jet-black eyes catching hers whenever doubts gnawed too deep. Tonight, the animal's presence felt heavier, more deliberate, as if it bore not just a message, but a reckoning. Emma sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug, cradling Lumen close. The kitten's faint glow pulsed weakly beneath her trembling hands, a fragile heart of light amid encroaching darkness. The little ball of warmth stirred softly, its amber eyes half-lidded, seemingly unaware of the escalating tempest outside these four walls. But Emma was acutely aware. The watchers were no longer lurking in the alley or just on the periphery of her vision. They had begun to pierce the veil in earnest, their forms flickering like flame-tainted phantoms in the edges of her awareness. She reached for the notebook where she had scribbled the cryptic messages from neighbors, messages soaked in fear and barely concealed hysteria. It told of deteriorating reality along the block, neighbors vanishing without a trace, walls bleeding, and whispered voices seeping beneath doors that hadn't been opened for hours. The warnings were escalating, merging into a chaotic chorus she struggled to parse. The crow's cries seemed to thread through that noise, each caw a sharp punctuation in the gathering storm. Her phone vibrated violently against the wooden floor, startling her. A new message flashed. An unknown number, no words, only a photo. The image was blurred but unmistakable. A feather, glossy and black, inexplicably burned at the edges as if touched by cold flame. Behind the feather, shadowy figures clustered, their eerie, glinting eyes locked on something beyond the frame. It was the Watchers, no doubt, but what were they after? And why send the feather now? Suddenly, a faint tapping came from the window. Emma's gaze snapped up. The crow, wings folded, pecked insistently at the glass, its head cocked to one side. She felt the animal's urgency ripple through her, a silent demand to act before time slipped away entirely. Her breath caught in her throat. There was a choice to be made: remain cocooned in the dwindling safety of her apartment, with Lumen's light growing thinner by the hour, or follow the enigmatic summons of the crow into the fracturing unknown. The price whispered on the wind was steep, an invisible ledger balancing trust, memory, and perhaps the kitten's fragile radiance. Emma uncrossed her legs and rose slowly, clutching Lumen to her chest. The kitten's glow flickered faintly in response, as if aware their journey was about to begin. A journey neither of them could refuse. Outside, the crow stretched its wings, its cry piercing the night. And as Emma opened the door, the shadows beyond seemed to pulse, waiting. But as she stepped into the chilling embrace of the street, a sudden movement caught her eye from the darkened alley. A second crow, darker than the first, its eyes glinting with a knowledge older than time itself. Was this companion a guardian, or a harbinger of something far worse? The crow perched silently on the fire escape outside Emma's window, its feathers slick against the damp evening air. Its sharp eyes gleamed with an intensity that felt almost human, fixated on her. For a moment, Emma thought it might speak, if only in a language beyond words. Lumen, cradled gently in her arms, stirred restlessly, its pale glow dimmer than before, flickering like a candle about to be snuffed out. Her breath hitched as the familiar, chilling whispers tickled her ears again, louder now, more insistent. The Watchers were closing in, always watching, always waiting, while the crow's rattle against the glass seemed urgent, a desperate plea. She had followed it into the night already, stepping away from the fragile sanctuary of her apartment. But nothing had felt certain except the inexorable pull of this creature's gaze. Steeling herself, Emma swung open the window and climbed out onto the fire escape, the cool metal biting at her palms. The crow shifted, settling on the ledge one story below, beckoning. "Come," it seemed to say, though its eyes held something deeper, an echo of a promise, or perhaps a warning. Down on the street, the city breathed under the cloak of twilight, streets slick with recent rain and bathed in the orange glow of street lamps. Shadows twisted unnaturally. From the corners of her vision, Emma glimpsed movement, a flicker of figures with two bright eyes, like those in the grainy image sent to her phone, lurking just beyond the edge of light. The Watchers. A sudden rustling overhead made her freeze. A second crow, blacker and larger, swooped down with a haunting croak. It landed beside the first, and Emma's heart clenched. This crow was different. There was something ancient in its presence, something older than memory. It held its head high, the glint in its eyes colder, sharper, like it carried secrets that weighed heavy upon the air. The glowing kitten in her arms quivered, Lumen's fragile light flickering like a dying star. Emma realized then that her burden was heavier than she'd dared admit. The crow with the ancient eyes fixed her with a gaze that seemed to strip away her defenses. Was this protector or predator? Herald or harbinger? A sudden soft tapping at her back, and the unmistakable whisper that had haunted her nights, made her turn sharply. Her phone vibrated, displaying a new message from that unknown number. The image was clearer this time, a crow's talon clutching an old rusted key, entwined with black feathers and what looked like faint inscriptions carved into the metal. The crow tilted its head, as if to say, "This is the answer." But at what cost? Emma's pulse quickened. Somewhere in the depths of that moment she understood that her path was no longer just about survival. Instead, it was about unlocking something far more ancient, something hidden beneath the city and whispered in the caws of crows. As the Watcher's eyes glinted from the darkness, the glow from Lumen flickered again, and nearly went out. What door would that key open? And what did the crows truly want from her? The night held its breath. Waiting. The city's restless hum seemed to pause as Emma stood at the edge of the abandoned subway platform, the rusted key clutched tightly in her trembling hand. The faint glow of Lumen pulsed, flickering like a dying star in her arms. Above her, the ancient crow watched silently from its perch on the graffiti-scrawled metal beam, its sharp eyes reflecting the pale light in a way that felt almost human, judging, waiting. The Watcher's glowing eyes flickered in the darkness beyond, their cold gazes fixed on her like cruel constellations. Emma had thought survival was the goal, just keep Lumen's fragile light alive and evade those shadows. But now she understood it was something else entirely. The key was not just an object, it was a burden, a responsibility that demanded choices she never wanted to face. The Watchers were no longer mere threats lurking in the night. They were pointers to a deeper truth, a secret lurking beneath the city like a sleeping beast. She remembered the whispered words that had come with the key's image, the old inscriptions, a language half forgotten but alive in some hidden part of her mind. It spoke of thresholds, of doors between worlds, gates that could open or lock away what should never be disturbed. And the crow, the ancient sentinel, was the keeper of that boundary. Each step Emma took forward was heavier than the last, the weight of Lumen's fading light mirroring the growing darkness in her heart. The Watchers shifted closer, the soft rustle of their movements blending with the distant drip of water echoing through the tunnels. She realized this was no longer just about protection. It was about sacrifice. When she reached the stone wall marked with the same inscriptions, the key felt warm, almost alive in her palm. The ancient crow leapt down to the platform, its talons clicking softly on the cracked concrete. It tilted its head, eyes narrowing, as if asking, "Are you ready to accept what lies beyond?" Emma hesitated. She thought of everything she might lose, her own safety, the fragile glow inside Lumen, the fragile hope she clung to. Yet, beneath that hesitation was a resolve hardening like ice. With a breath that felt like plunging into cold water, she slid the key into the hidden lock carved into the stone. The key fit perfectly, as if it belonged here, as if it had been waiting for her all along. A low rumble shuddered through the platform. The wall began to split, revealing a dark passage illuminated only by Lumen's flickering light and the ancient crow's unblinking gaze. Behind the watchers, the city's usual chaos seemed to fade, swallowed by an eerie stillness.